Hmm. Some questions brewing. The main thing that I'm going to talk about today is spiritual practice. There's just something that I've caught on to that I want to explain to you. Something you may not have considered that might be sabotaging spiritual practice. It took me only 15 years, almost 15 years, to put it into words. But I have now, and I'm going to explain that. How we, even without knowing we're doing it, we sabotage our spiritual practice. And that a core aspect of the ego actually wants that to happen. So you've always known this. I'm going to talk about my finding in a little bit, but you've always known this, right? That there's resistance, right? Resistance to spiritual practice, resistance to meditation, inquiry, mindfulness. I'm going to give you a way into that resistance to show you what it really is, most of the time or much of the time. There's some other questions first, though. So here's someone who, I haven't read this yet, so let's hope it's PG enough. I don't know if you want to talk about it in a video. Let me read a little bit of this first. Yeah. Oh, this is good, actually. Okay. If I don't add any, she first of all talks about being enthusiastic around certain insights she's in training to become a facilitator. She's enthusiastic about certain insights around PTSD. And the PTSD has been clearing up recently because of the Kill Bee inquiries. So she's writing, I had to understand the context. And she writes a little bit here. If I don't add any information that I have learned about it, then PTSD for me is just a contracted pressuring energy in the middle of the brain, affecting the whole body with a feeling of tension, burning, and a sense of alert. This was a very simple and naked description. So my nervous system was always my weakest point because of that constant state of overwhelm and threat. It was always active. It takes a lot of energy from the system also because it shuts down the system at the same time. So yeah, not easy to live with this in the long term. So I started to converse with the PTSD in the brain. Different words came up just by feeling into the brain. Psychological fear, threat, ego, brain stress, danger, and so on. And also asking, what do you feel? What would you like to say? Show, what do you need? And so forth. These undid the Velcro gradually. The Velcro is the connection between thoughts and sensations. So she's saying, these questions undid that Velcro. I always stop inquiry on that when I feel I reached the limit. It means that the sense of myself or identity that's been in that mode and identifies PTSD is starting to feel it is losing ground. Meanwhile, arriving energetically into the natural state where it can rest, presence. This is the point where I come to rest totally and all thought activity or stress energy falls away. A new or the real world opens up. From here I can see the exhausted me. So from here I want to be a good home to that part of myself. At the same time not believing that I have to make myself into any state. That's a good point. Come back to that, hopefully. Caring for the one who went through a lot, but not indulging or feeding it or anything around it. That's very rich too. And not creating anything even from this process, meaning the Kill Bee inquiries or the insights that she's having. Because I also noticed that when the brain um, when the brain is at rest, spirituality falls away or doesn't make any sense at all. When the brain is at rest, spirituality falls away or doesn't make any sense at all. That's yes. I just talked about that about the unknown. We'll talk about this in a second. Maybe after a while, my brain won't even want to say anything about it anymore. Just rest. The less the hardness, the more tenderness. hmm So she's just sharing her process here. She sent some pictures too about the brain, of the brain. There's a lot here. She isn't really asking a question, but it's worth commenting on because this is a real insight that she's having where her PTSD, the energy, is coming to rest for the first time. And if you've lived your whole life, she's trying to explain what it's like to live your whole life with PTSD symptoms. So trauma happened to her early in life. And so her whole system has been, hijacked by that trauma. And when that happens, that's the normal for people. So you don't even know anything different. You grow up that way and you kind of think that that's reality, or you don't think there's anything you can do about it because you kind of feel that way all the time or most of the time. Um, and so then to have moments of clarity, moments of rest and presence where she says, like, the world finally, the real world shows itself and the PTSD quiets, those are big. That's big for someone. And it's just one of the many, many things that we see with the Killaby inquiries. She also mentions that she doesn't want to replace the PTSD state with some other state. And that's really wise because I think a lot of people are doing that. And if you're out there listening to me, I understand it because if you simply turn it into a different state, then you don't have to deal with it. But the problem with making it into another state is it doesn't deal with the underlying root problem. We see this all the time in different forms. I mean, isn't most of Western medicine based on the idea that I'm going to do something that's going to change your state, but doesn't get to the root of the issue? Quite often, that's the case. So we're very used to that here in the West, so much so that we don't even complain about it anymore. We just assume that our medicines and many of the things that we do don't get to the root. It's unfortunate, but that's where we are. When you don't get to the root, you have to change the state. That's really what addiction is. You know, if you think that people are out there just partying, some are, but many, many people are medicating underlying mental health issues like this. And that's an example of changing state. So I did that for years. I have direct experience with what she's saying about changing state, constantly taking handfuls of painkillers to cover up my state, which was for me like an ongoing sense of anxiety and self consciousness. But changing the state, even with spiritual practice, isn't the answer. It wasn't for me. Because you can do all sorts of things to change your state with spirituality, breathing, mantras, energy work, various forms of yoga. And that's a lot of times that's what you're doing. Unless something is being deconstructed, unless the source of the suffering is being deconstructed, most likely we're using spirituality to change the state. There isn't anything wrong with that, first of all. But there's nothing wrong with it. We all have to survive. So change your state if that's all that you can do. But what she's saying and what she's been involved with has been a deconstruction of the root programs, the programs that lie at the root of this PTSD experience for her. And that's why I think she's saying that the real world opens up. That's not a new state. That's the deconstruction or the falling away of what's there. And when you say that a new world opens up, she's really saying just, I can see clearly now. I can see clearly now, right? And that's a real thing when people have that experience. It's not just, hey, I've cultivated another state to cover that one up. That's an example of deconstruction. I do know someone who's gotten really good at changing states, and he invested his whole life, really, the last 20 years, in cultivating these states through Kundalini yoga, breath of fire, breathing practices, other breathing practices, various yoga postures. I mean, he's got it down to a science. I mean, he did. And all the while, he didn't realize that he was just changing his state, that he wasn't deconstructing, that he wasn't really transcending some of his deepest trauma. This is where the rubber meets the road, is that there are many, many people out there doing the kinds of practices that are not really designed truly to get to the root of things. Hear me out, because even though if it pisses you off, there may be something here that you discover about your own practice that changes things. Think about it for a second. What is the root here? How do we get down to the root? As long as I believe, as long as there's Velcro around certain programs, then we haven't gotten to the root. So as long as there are words and pictures, and usually quite a few of them, stuck to or connected to sensations or emotions, like when she's saying she's working with various labels, various ideas in her mind, that were all Velcro to sensations in the body, creating the discomfort. So she gave an example of the difference between changing your state and deconstructing, because she deconstructed. She's been in the process of deconstruction for several months. And so that work is leading to the falling away of certain Velcro, certain programs. This this is priceless, this topic, because if you miss this, it can be a huge miss. Because many people are doing spiritual practices that don't undo the Velcro effect. So what they do is they cultivate a state in which the Velcro goes dormant and quiet. So they still believe what they believe. They're still programmed in the same way, but the program goes dormant. And what gets cultivated is a state where the nervous system gets regulated. There may even be a sense of spaciousness that happens, but it's not the kind of spaciousness that happens with deconstruction. You can cultivate experiences of spaciousness or emptiness through breathing and various meditation. And I'm not saying that those practices do not go to the Velcro, but hear me out, that this Velcro doesn't just get undone because we cultivate a nice state. It's like if I'm sitting here quietly in awareness and I stay with that and just let everything get quiet for me, or even do some breathing, like breathing up the energy of the spine, through forceful breathing or some other practice. And then after I finish the practice, there's a sense of maybe a deeper calm. But the question, though, is this, is when you start running those same programs around the PTSD or whatever state, do you still get triggered? Do you still believe it? That's the question. Do you still believe the programs? Are the programs still Velcroed in your experience? So what I find a lot, and not all the time, some of these practices do help. They have helped through the years. The great majority of them don't get to the deeply somatic stuff. So here I have to be the bad guy. It's like I'm the guy that has to say this. And that, I know that it's going to piss certain people off. It's going to upset them because you're defending your practice. And we become identified with our practices and our traditions. So I get that's happening potentially for you. But the first line of defense or even shame when you hear this, or attacking me back, is really just a temporary thing. And if you just let that happen, just yell at me, talk to me at the computer, and tell me how your practice is good. Get that out. Go ahead and get that out. So there are simple tests that you can do that we know how to do now on spiritual practices, which tests the Velcro. It actually is a test to see whether before and after a practice, whether you're still believing the things that did everything just go dormant, or did you actually deconstruct something? There's ways to check into that. So that way is built into KI. The person who wrote this email does that as a matter of practice. So in other words, re-triggering. So we pull things back up to see the extent to which they're rooted in the body still. So with this practice, we're constantly checking to see whether the practice is actually skillful. But other practices don't have that test on them. So the state that you cultivate may be deceptive in the sense it hasn't really deconstructed the root issue. So the problem with that then is if the root issue isn't dissolved, then you're going to find yourself going back to the practice over and over again to cultivate that state. But when you deconstruct something, you don't have to go, when you really deconstruct something, you don't have to go back to it. Now, you may, even with inquiry, go back to a topic several times to meet the force of the energy, the charge with it. Certain forms of PTSD, for example, beliefs, programs that happened when you were a childhood may be very strong. You have to come back to them. But once they're really deconstructed, and you can see that in inquiry, you don't have to go back to that. The deconstruction ends that program. And when that program is in, the state that's cultivated or what results is not a state. It's just the clarity, the absence of that program. That's what it is. It's the absence of that program. So it would show up as being able to see the world or being present in the moment, seeing things more as they are instead of a state. She also says something interesting, which is when her mind is at rest, spirituality doesn't make sense. Because the spirituality and the pointers I've been saying on YouTube are also programming. Maybe now, or maybe she always got that. Do you get what I'm saying, Serena? What I've been talking about the last few days has been about the things that we know through thinking, including spiritual insights, and how we keep going to those programs, which is natural. We keep going to those programs, not recognizing that they're programs too. And that's really good to see that when you're just resting and you don't know any of that. You don't know anything about anything, let alone spirituality. So she's here, Serena, the person who wrote this. Let me see what she has to say. I'm sure that insights are pouring out for you, Serena, because when you have big discoveries like that, it's like, you know how it is, the insights just keep coming. So it sounds like they are coming. Hopefully I can read them. For me, it took 6 months deep repression and trauma work to reach the root. So there you go. There's an honest assessment for you. You know, that's somebody who's not kidding around. Serena is not kidding around. She did spend 6 months in deep work. And frankly, that's what it takes. It takes that kind of dedication to really get to the root of things. So it took me 6 months to heal the chronic pain in my spine. A solid 6 months, not inquiring every day, all day, but inquiring every day, but not all day. Spending at least a half an hour a day, mainly on anger repression. So my chronic pain is a really good example of the difference between practices to deconstruct and then just cultivate different states. For the first almost 2 years of my chronic pain, I did not do deconstructive inquiry on it because I didn't have exactly the skills that I needed to do that on anger repression and the trauma. So what I did is I did a whole bunch of stuff that tried to cultivate different states, because that's all I could do. Medication is a way to cultivate a different state. A lot of the somatic movement that I was doing in yoga cultivated a different state so that there was more rest with the pain. It's like the mind could quiet a little bit, but the pain wasn't really, not really affected by any of that. I spent for those first 2 years hours in just meditative awareness, just being in awareness. But again, it wasn't deconstructed. The pain wasn't deconstructed. I actually journaled, solidly journaled everything that I was doing during the chronic pain era, those first 2 years. So I was actually keeping track of how different practices cultivated a different state for me that made it more manageable, the pain. All of that was very, very frustrating. I mean, it helped me survive, but it was frustrating in the sense of it's just bare survival. It was when I started to deconstruct the anger repression under the pain that brought about the healing of that. And so that's a deconstruction. And therefore, the abiding or the rest that happened from that was quite natural after that, as the pain was deconstructed. Kind of like what Serena is saying. There's a deeper recognition of just rest, deep rest, because of the deconstruction. To me, this is a huge miss for people. What kinds of practices? You hear me saying the resting as awareness doesn't go deep enough. I mean, that's almost blasphemy in non-duality to say something like that. But I only am saying this after years and years of experience with people, one-on-one, and my own experience with the chronic pain. Just hear me out on this, since we're on this topic of spiritual practices. And I still want to get to the end of the video where I talk about how we actually sabotage our practice without knowing it. But if I can appeal to at least your logic, even if you feel defensive about your practice, if I could appeal to some aspect of your logic, or you can resonate with anything that I'm saying, it's like planting the seed. And then you at least have to consider at some point what I'm saying. Once you get over the part where it's like, oh, my practice is fine, Scott. I'm tired of you putting down other practices and teachers. It's discernment is what it is. What we're doing is it's a call for discernment. It isn't that I just like picking on things. I really don't. It's discernment. And sometimes when we get to these places in our culture where you can't say anything about anything. You know what I mean? If you say anything about anything, you can't make judgments, you can't discern, you can't compare sometimes. It's in certain aspects of our culture don't even allow us to compare anymore. So let's put all that to rest and discern here. I'm just going to appeal to something, even if you're feeling defensive around it, hear me. If I'm sitting here and resting as awareness, the programs involved in my trauma aren't conscious. So I could sit here all day, every day for years, and certain aspects of it would never show up. I mean, eventually things would start showing up. Eventually things would become conscious. But the trauma is repressed, and obviously emotional repression is repressed. So again, listen to me. What I'm saying is any of those practices that only are interested in just resting or abiding as awareness or calm abiding doesn't get to the unconscious. Again, the unconscious can eventually come up. Maybe. You don't even know, though. That's just a maybe. With inquiry, we bring it up so that you can see it. So the practice of just resting as awareness, which is a practice within this teaching. So I am criticizing a practice within my own teaching so that you don't take it too personally. I'm criticizing myself here in the way that I've taught this. Resting as awareness is very helpful. It's a practice that I totally encourage people to engage in. But listen to what I'm saying. I would imagine that Serena, if she were to share about this, she would say that some of these labels, some of the words like psychological fear, threat, stress, danger, and other programs like I'm unsafe, such and such, that these are hidden. So, in other words, it's not until we go into the somatic experience with awareness and ask certain questions that they finally pop up. I don't know what she would say about that, but that's an example of going further than just resting as awareness, something more skillful than that. I don't know how many different ways I have to say this before you really take a look at it, because you've probably been sold the bill of goods around this by meditation practices or traditions or teachings. Sold you on the idea that to rest as your true nature is the only thing that you need to do. But if you understand unconsciousness and repression, you won't believe that. If you understand that the nature of trauma is for it to be repressed, and that there are a host of thoughts and feelings that we repress to survive childhood and other relationships, if you know that that's the case, then you know that what I'm saying makes sense. And I won't belabor this point too much more, but I want to keep going back to my own experience because, again, I mean, everybody who does this work kind of has this experience in one way or another where they wake up to the fact that something that they're doing or not doing is not skillful enough to meet their suffering. So, just like me, for example, resting as awareness for almost 2 years, just not doing a lot of deconstructive inquiry, just resting and letting it be. And not only did it not get better, it got worse, completely missing the anger repression. So I sat there for about 2 years and never once, not once, did the thought come up spontaneously, I cannot feel and express anger. That never came up. Never during that time did it come up around trauma in fourth grade, a particular art project, and being stuck in a library after being bullied. Like, if those things came up, they flashed up and then they would go back down in the resting as awareness thing. Wow, huge miss. Because as I was finally able to inquire into these memories, there was a whole network of thoughts connected to it, anger, repression, trauma thoughts. And all of that was hidden. The most that it showed me, I don't even remember these flashing up during those 2 years. I don't remember those images flashing up. But through inquiry, those images started to come up and then the other thoughts connected to it. And that made all the difference. That is why the healing happened. It wasn't from just being in awareness. Okay, have I beaten that horse dead yet? I'll probably keep saying it though. So I want to go and just see what Serena and others are talking about, and then I'll get to the great sabotage in spiritual practice. Sharing some good stuff here. Um, Say more, Serena. When you say it's not possible to work only with PTSD, I think I know what you mean, but can you expound upon that a little bit? By the way, Serena is newly certified. Serena that shows up on these, it just certified as a KI facilitator yesterday. Congratulations, Serena. Good insights. Serena asked me, don't we want to do some experiential work on that? Here? No. But yes, where we do experiential work, I may do some. But what are you asking exactly, Serena? Meditation has its place. All these practices have their place. Meditation is something that I still enjoy. It's mainly just sitting and being and watching and allowing, but and so I'm not, remember the message that I've been sending is you don't have to be disloyal or let go of these practices or these teachings that talk about resting as awareness. Just supplement. That's all. Supplement, integrate is my suggestion. Keep your meditation and then add skillful inquiry. Stick around, Carolyn, because I have something else that might be helpful for you to hear. Most people think it is. In terms of sabotaging spiritual practice, we've uncovered the beast. We have figured out the beast to a certain degree, the beast of resistance. We've discovered where it comes from. Part of it. Serena, you're asking me a question about experiential work, but I'm not following you. So Serena's working with resistance. So, is it time to uncover the beast? Hear me out. Just listen to the whole thing here. Through the years, we developed the boomerang, and the boomerang is this tool that you use to uncover the deficiency story that's operating in any particular relationship, right? You may have heard me talk about it with people. So, like, you have your spouse there, and the boomerang asks, what deficiency story is being triggered here with my spouse, or what deficiency story is active? And what may come up is I'm not good enough, or I'm unlovable, such and such. And that story that I've been saying sabotages. It's a self-sabotaging story. The deficiency story itself sabotages. It literally has sabotage with it. It's inextricably linked, let's say it that way. Wherever there's a deficiency story, there is sabotage, because sabotage is how the deficiency story stays alive, how it survives. So, if I believe I'm not good enough, deficiency story, the consciousness here will look at people and objects in a way that confirms that I'm not good enough. So there's a constant mirroring going on. And this is how we keep these false selves alive, because they're not real. We have to keep them alive unconsciously by this mirroring that happens. So the sabotage happens because we need these other objects and people to confirm that we're not good enough, to confirm the identity, all unconscious. We need them to confirm that. If it doesn't get confirmed in a relationship, that's like annihilation. That's death. Then we'd be nobody. And the system doesn't want to be nobody. So it fights for survival, that story, it does. And it looks again, the consciousness looks for anything to confirm it. And then sabotage is part of it. So if I get into a relationship, for example, and I believe I'm not good enough, the consciousness will look for evidence of that. Oh, she doesn't love me. She thinks this other guy is better, more attractive. I can't live up to her standards. I just don't feel like I'm enough for her. Those kinds of stories operate. And so that story that's operating in a relationship is seeking to confirm itself. That's what it's doing right there. But in doing that, it's sabotaging the relationship. Hear that? So even to the mind will even think these are all valid concerns. And sometimes they are. We have valid concerns in our relationship, but this deficiency story is masquerading as valid relationship concerns a lot of the time. But really, it's just a sense of deficiency on your side that brings up all the problems with the relationship and that prove, for whatever reason, that you're not good enough. And so if you ride that wave, if you stay in that story, you could easily, and people do all the time, sabotage the relationship. Like it ends, or it just becomes really toxic, or there's just no growth in it or something. So it's a sabotaging thing. Now, if you can see that, now that's happening everywhere. So the whole world is confirming back your identity, right? Go on social media, that proves I'm not good enough or I'm unlovable. Go on a date, that proves it. Go for that promotion at work, then you get it, that proves it. Everything is proving it. Everything, including spiritual practice. This is the gem here. Hear me out. Spiritual practices and teachings are objects too. It's not just people that mirror this back, but the whole world does. And so, if we already have a story, for example, if our program already contains stories like, or our identity contains stories like, I'm never going to make it, I'm not good enough, my suffering is never going to go away, or I have great doubts about whether anything will work for me, Kilby inquiries won't work for me, I've tried so many things, nothing really worked. Are you catching on? Nothing really worked. Why is that? It could be because of the methods that you were trying. Sometimes the methods aren't as skillful as they could be. But chances are what was playing into that was the sabotaging deficiency story. So let's reverse engineer it now. All the things that you've done, you've probably received benefit from any of those things. But overall, you may have this viewpoint that I've tried all these different things and none of them worked. Go into this inquiry with me for a second, reverse inquiry. Just sit here quietly and say to yourself, my suffering will go away. All my suffering will go away. Listen for the response. Listen for the doubt. That story that says it won't go away, or they have great doubts about it, that is the sabotaging story. So try another one here. The Kilby inquiries will work for me. Is there some version of no there? I am good enough to do this work. I know how to do this work right. I can do it correctly. So if you found any no there, chances are you've got some sabotage going on. So think of it this way. The program that has already decided that these inquiries won't work or that your suffering will go away, that's what's doing inquiry here. That story is doing inquiry, and which means that when or if the inquiries don't work for you, that's what the story ultimately wants. Now, this is where it gets confusing because consciously you're going to want this work to help you. What I'm saying is an under the radar, more unconscious sabotaging story that literally feeds off a method not working for you. It feeds off of it, just like a relationship that goes bad. It feeds the deficiency story. So unconsciously, you're getting what you want when a practice doesn't work. You're getting the confirmation of that there's something wrong with you, and then you go to the next method. But here's the problem: when you go to the next method, they may not talk about deficiency stories. So you may be bringing that deficiency story into the method, where you start the method. This is post KI. Start the method, but you still have the belief, all my suffering isn't going to go away, and this probably won't work for me, or I can't do it right. So then you're going to have the same experience most likely with that method and a string of more methods on the way, simply because the story, the deficiency story, is anchored into your experience and it is doing this work. So when we spot that, if I spot that in a client, what I would do is like give that client a homework assignment to inquire around the sabotage for spiritual practices. And I would have them do that first before anything else. Clear that. dissolve it before you start working on trauma or deep rooted stuff, or really before you get serious about awakening. Sabotage, sabotage, sabotage. If you've been doing KI and you're having trouble going deep on your own, and you've been wondering, is this the right thing for me? Be very careful. It may not be the right thing for you. Be very careful that you're not just acting on a deficiency story and sabotaging it. Because again, if you don't catch that here we inquire into it. Other methods, not necessarily. So here we can spot it and we can give inquiries to deal with that, and that's going to help you. See, because this sabotage is probably happening in a bunch of areas in your life. Illuminating in the spiritual practice is very helpful because, obviously, for obvious reasons, but even at work, for example, if you have sabotage in one area, chances are you have it in other areas, or relationship. There's ways to test all that out and find out if it's there. Yeah. Spiritual practice that doesn't work very well. Let's see what people are saying here. So everybody's kind of finding their sabotage. There you go, the slight fear of the unknown, of the magnitude of change. And then Serena says, I literally feel the sabotaging energy in the body. Yes. It's a big find. If you could just go back to those reverse inquiries, and then if you know how to do reverse inquiry, stay in that inquiry. I'm going to go probably do some of it with people in the room, in our little private room today. I'm not going to do it here. But in that room, we can get you started on inquiry around this. So the room is the Scott Funkhauser account on Facebook. I most likely will go there later today and do something like this, maybe, and other stuff. That's the account where I'm probably going to head to do more work around this today. Sabotage is a big thing. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Your resume doesn't matter. Nothing matters when there's a sabotage. My realization didn't matter when I was sabotaging the chronic pain thing. Let me show you this and how literally sabotaging it is. I had a belief that my pain was physical. It was a belief. It was reinforced by doctors and other people. Google reinforced it. That belief not only stopped me from inquiring, but when I started inquiring, it stopped me from doing it skillfully because the belief wants to confirm itself. So when the mind believes this is physical and this pain, how that belief is doing inquiry. The belief that doesn't even believe that this is emotional to begin with. And my inquiry was super ineffective and didn't actually make a dent in it at all. So I spent several weeks, at least 2 weeks I know, looking at that story. So doing reverse inquiry on it and unhooking from the idea that it was physical. And then when I could see the opening that allowed the thought to come through, this is emotional, then my inquiry became skillful after that, but not before. So think about how many hours you're spending doing spiritual practices where there's a sabotage. All that energy, how much money have you spent? Think about that. How much money have you given to teachers and different things, and then you carried into that retreat or that workshop the story, I can't do it right, my suffering's not going to end, and this probably won't work. It's basically just throwing money to the wind and wasting time to a certain degree. So don't you want to stop now and check into this? Like before you do one other practice. If I heard this and it resonated in the way that it does for me, I'd be like, well, hold on. I'm not going to go meditate right now. I'm not going to go do my breathing exercise right now. I'm not even going to sit down and do inquiry because I already believe it's not going to work and my suffering's not going to go away. Now I know this. So now I'm going to inquire into that. That's what I would be doing if I heard this video. I'd be stopping everything in favor of deconstructing the story that nothing is going to work, really. So it's good to just check into that for myself. So KI is going to work. I mean, yeah, it's quiet. It's like nothing's there. Oh, and that makes me remember during the time working with chronic pain again, where on those bad days, the mind would try to come up with this is not going to work. The truth is I didn't know whether it was going to work completely. You don't know, cannot know. But the story that says it knows is the problem. So I would just go into that when it would come up, like this isn't working. So I would say this is working. As a reverse inquiry, just watch the objections. I had to clean it up. So that's what I'm inviting you to do, clean up your sabotage. Let's see if there's any comments here before I leave that I can respond to. Oh, that's a good one. Carolyn, not a good one, but you know what I mean. Nothing really worked because of my belief that nothing works. Here's the thing, reality is not what it appears to be. There are studies, well, I know one study at least, probably more, but one solid study that says if you believe that you're addicted, you'll remain addicted. So it's really tricky because experience shows us addiction. And then the mind just says, well, I'm just reporting on what experience gives me. I'm not creating it by thinking about it that way. But that's not how things really are. How we think about things is everything. So if I pick up KI and I already think it's not going to work, right? Nothing's going to work. So just like with the addiction thing, the way they're studying that, it's like what you believe. If you believe that your experience shows you that you're addicted, then you will experience more of that. So if you believe that your past history of practices resulted in not working, that belief is formed. So then more of the same coming. It's to me, it's the same logic. If you believe you're addicted, you'll be more addiction. If you believe that it's not going to work, you'll get more of that. I had a friend who would spiral down on drugs and alcohol like clockwork. After so many months, he would just spiral down. He was doing all these things to try to get himself not to spiral down, but he had a central belief that he would spiral down based on his past. This is where it gets tricky because you could look at his past and you go, oh, yeah, yeah, you've spiraled down many times. So his mind thought he was just reporting on the experience, just reporting that this is what happens. But he was believing it. And so in believing it, manifested more of that. So then he did inquiry on, I'm not going to spiral down, and deconstructed the belief that he has to spiral down. And then guess what happened? Immediately, the spiraling stopped. And I do mean immediately. buy into what feels good. Thank you, Carolyn, because picking methods where you buy into one that feels good, at least there's an opportunity that you're just changing states into a more positive state. So the deconstruction of the negative state would be deeper because then you don't have to substitute with anything. It's exhausting to continuously try to substitute one state for another. See, I did that in addiction. That's what addiction was for me. So I think that's why when I got into the spiritual seeking, that this whole thing of like using one state to override another state felt just like more addiction. So that helped me having addiction to drugs and alcohol, helped me catch on to the stuff in spirituality where you're being encouraged to change, make yourself feel better. So I did that. Like, it doesn't work. It works temporarily. It just makes you feel good temporarily. It doesn't deconstruct the underlying programs. So those programs are still running and the suffering that comes with them is still coming. And so then you have to go and change the state again, right? Each time, feel better, feel better, feel better. You could spend your whole life doing that. All right, Serena's got a question. The utility on sabotage. What do I get, Serena, out of being afraid, of believing I'm afraid of growth? What do I get out of believing that? Mm-hmm. Just reading. Did you find your utility, Serena? All right. So just people commenting, not a lot of questions, good comments. Hopefully this planted the seed for you to no longer even do another practice without. So if you want to know how to get under this, so I don't do the spiritual, I don't do the experiential work here. Go to that Facebook account. We're going to start that in a little bit. Probably talk about this and work with people that are there on whatever they're inquiring into. And just to remind you, so now we're going to go to this space on the internet where almost all my videos are going to be there. You're going to see these videos go away. Not go away, but I'm not going to do as many of them because I'm really interested in working with people on experiential work. That's where my interest lies. So I'm looking for people to go to that forum who have some basic skills in KI and who are really looking at stuff so we can have an interactive dialogue. So that new website, it hasn't been announced yet. We were thinking the first week of December. We talked about November, but Alec, my much more than assistant, he's much more than that. He's going out of town for a week. So we're shooting for the beginning of December. Again, just to remind you, videos like this will appear. There'll be interactive videos like this. There'll be videos where we pull people up. The other facilitators will be there. We pull people up on camera. We facilitate them. There'll be meetings, live meetings that originate from there. There'll be a lot of different things, content to help you go deeper with this work. The whole point of this work, if you'll remember, is to let go of your dependencies on teachers and even on facilitators to become more and more skillful on your own. Right? And when you become more skillful on your own, you literally do not depend on others as much. That's really good spiritual practice. It's not bad to depend on others, but the issue with that is that that can be an impediment in spiritual practice because then you're waiting for the other person to help you constantly. And in the meantime, you can feel like there's nothing you can do about your suffering. So it's disempowering. Being dependent is disempowering people. Excuse me. The devotional path and those other things where we keep going to the teacher, it's fine. It's exactly what has to happen when it happens. But what I'm saying is At a certain point, you have to look for your dependency. In what way are you giving your power away to other people? So this platform is about no longer doing that. Coming and letting us show you and teach you, like depending on us at first until you get the skill and you just take off. What we're doing is like lighting a fire in you. That's all we're doing with these skills, and then the fire just burns on its own. So come join us in a few weeks. Stay tuned to my newsletter. Go to kilby.com, sign up for the newsletter. That's what will give you all the information on the new site. See you guys.